Do you know who Simon Schemberg is? Simon is he's the former communications director for the International Ice Hockey Federation from 2001 to, I want to say, 2014. That's where I first got to know Simon a little bit. I really like Simon. Very outspoken, very intelligent, very historically briefed as well. He was, actually, as an aside, Simon was the gentleman who came up with the concept of the Triple Gold Club. And I believe there are 22, maybe 23 members of it. The Triple Gold Club is players that have won the World Championship, players that have won Olympic gold, players that have won the Stanley Cup. Okay? That's your Triple Gold Club. This was his idea, to honor those players. Anyhow, after Canada's ousting last night at the hands of Czechia at the 2025 World Junior Hockey Championships, etc., blah, 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 blah. Simon today in a Twitter thread submits this, and I'm just going to read it to you because it's Simon, so he makes some really highly intelligent points here. So his first tweet, he quotes Tommy Boosted. Now, if you don't know Tommy is now pro-European scout for the Detroit Red Wings. So Tommy Boosted, former Swedish chief of hockey development, said, quote, Canada has 10 times more players, 10 times more rinks, 10 times more coaches, and 10 times more money. Still, we can compete, end quote. All right, that's what Boosted said. Simon picks up. The hockey world has the right to have high expectations on every Team Canada, just like football expects premium quality from Brazil or basketball expects excellence from the United States. You can't blame on Bedard or Celebrini not being here. Canada should have the depth to produce a high-skilled junior team every year, and this edition didn't have it, similar to last year's. I thought that Canada had learned the lesson that the role or energy players are not efficient in a short event with IIHF rules. Let me say that one again. Role or energy players are not efficient in a short event with IIHF rules. It was appalling how little Canada created 5-on-5 in all games. The template for international success was established at the 2010 Vancouver Olympics, where players like Joe Thornton, Rick Nash, Danny Heatley, and Jonathan Taves played, quote, bottom six. In a short tournament, here's a money line. In a short tournament, skill can grit, but grit can't skill. Especially in a World Junior Championships, you don't even go with a top 9, bottom 3. You go with a top 12, bottom 0. Again, you don't even go with a top 9, bottom 3. You go with a top 12, bottom 0. In particular, if you have Canada's depth. Everything with this Team Canada seemed outdated and a throwback to the 80s. Limited skill, poor discipline, and old-time coaching. Hands in your pockets coaching did nothing to inspire. Hey, did I tell you Simon was kind of a poet here? The team apparently did not practice even once between their loss to the USA on New Year's Eve and the quarterfinals versus the Czechs. Quote, players were exhausted, end quote. 18 and 19-year-olds? Exhausted? Really? And final point from Simon. You can't blame the players. When a fish rots, it rots from the head and down. So cheer up, Canada. The sun came up this morning. Welcome to the sheet, Friday, January 3rd. Let's get going. I don't know what the better lines were in that one. Skill can grit, but grit can't skill. That's good. You don't go with a top 9, bottom 3. You go with the top 12, bottom 0. I like that one too. I like Simon. Hello and welcome to The Sheet. Everybody listening, everybody watching, everybody involved in the chat. Thank you for the live eyeballs. Or maybe you're listening on Spotify. Maybe you're listening on Apple Podcasts. We appreciate all of it as we get you ready for the weekend. A weekend that will not include Canada at the World Juniors. That'll be one of the focuses of today. Also, we're going to go back to some low-hanging fruit here. And I always maintain, even low-hanging fruit is still nutritious. Still vitamin C in there. We'll talk a little bit more about the JT Miller, Elias Pettersson situation. Big win by Vancouver yesterday, although they tried to throw it away against the Seattle Kraken last night. We'll get Brian Burke's thoughts. Burke stops by every Friday. Let's get ready to grumble. Burke will be here. He's seen plenty of these types of situations, and he knows the Vancouver market well, obviously. So we'll start with Burke, and we'll see where we get. But the big story that started last night and bled into today is the Czechia win over Canada, eliminating them from the World Junior Championships for the second year in a row in the quarterfinals. Same team is the culprit, Czechia. With that, we get to Stephen Ellis, who's still on site in Ottawa, where I suspected the sun came up for a lot of teams, but maybe not for Team Canada today. Stephen, nice to see you again. I recognize what those hotel rooms look like. I'm sure you're missing your own bed by this point of the tournament, but nonetheless, welcome aboard. We'll start wide brush and then build down, sort of reverse pyramid style. Opening question for you, Stephen Ellis. What happened? Floor is yours.
Well, first off, it was sunny for the first time today, I think, since the start of this tournament. Yeah. So that was a change for Ottawa. Look, man, Canada, you look at this team and the skill that they had in theory and the ability to go out there and play all situations in theory, and the blue line that should have looked really good in theory, and everything just seemed to collapse. And you look at all this, again, to go back to the skill, a guy like Easton Cowan should have had a significantly better tournament. Gavin McKenna, all the hype surrounding him, that was unfortunately the weakest Team Canada tournament we've ever seen from him. Granted, the oldest competition he's ever to play against. It looked like you had, at any given time, you had 5 players playing for themselves on the ice and not playing as a team. And with all that talent and you can't convert, this will go down as one of the most disappointing Team Canada losses, maybe the most, because of just the raw talent and how many potential top 6 NHLers that this group's going to have. Like, I know a lot of people looked at this team and said weak, but like Berkeley Catton's great, and Easton Cowan is having a great year in the OHL, and Cal Ritchie's going to be a great two-way threat. So there's a lot of talent, just absolutely no execution.
You know, I'm not sure if you heard me off the top. I don't know if you know Simon Schemberg, former comms director of the IIHF. I'm sure you've acquainted with Simon over the years. And he brings up a couple of really interesting points, and one that really stuck with me when I first read it. And it winks at something that Hockey Canada used to excel at and has now in the last 2 years gotten away from. It's a great line. Skill can grit, but grit can't skill. You know, the Hockey Canada philosophy coming off of 2006 in Italy was skill adapts. Let's just get the most highly skilled players and put them in all different positions. It doesn't matter if they're used to limited minutes, used to playing on the penalty kill, used to playing whatever. The most highly skilled players can adapt to any role. Canada got away from that completely. Does that resonate with you when you look at the roster? Who was there? Like, make no mistake about it. Like, you're right. There is some elite level talent on this team. There's also a lot of elite level talent. This is part of the big story. A lot of elite level talent that was left at home to watch this thing on TSN. Does the skill can grit, but grit can't skill line resonate with you?
Absolutely. And, you know, as much as I love a guy like Cole Baudouin, obviously he got kicked out of that game, but that's a guy who could probably fight the Hulk and come out on top. Like, this guy is so strong and does so many great things away from the puck. But we saw him play on the top line when they needed to get a bit more scoring, and that did not work. We saw Gavin McKenna. We saw him playing with, you know, as much as I was okay with Luca Pinelli making the team, clearly that wasn't working there either. And McKenna was kind of wasted with players. Again, we know that what Berkeley Catton could do. He scored over 50 goals, but what we're seeing from him is he's a better playmaker. So we didn't have a pure goal scorer on that line. Why was Rakoff and Martone not playing together? Like, again, doesn't make a lot of sense. when I looked at how this roster was going to be built, the way they were taking things at selection camp, it looked like, okay, you're going to bring Goche. He looked really good. Tanner Howe looked really good. Does that make Cataford a bit of an odd man out? Maybe. Do you? What about Pinelli at that point? I liked him, but there was just going to be a lot of guys out there that are not the most skilled players, but do other things out there to be very effective. And all of a sudden, you've got a true bottom six, which that doesn't work. And if it works for some other teams in the tournament, it's because they don't have the pure skill and the pure talent to work with. Like the United States won gold last year. They didn't run 13 scoring forwards. They had guys who were really good at those roles, but they were really good at those roles better than anybody in Canada in those similar roles, whether it be checking, whether it be defensive centers. And that's why the United States won gold last year and looked like they can do it again this year. When Canada, you're trying to put players in situations they're not used to, and you're trying to play a certain way. It didn't work. And the ability to make better changes on the fly, just to me, just was astounding. It was Dave Cameron's not coaching Team Canada again. I think that's pretty clear.
Yeah. I think there's a few things there. I don't think Dave Cameron's coaching Team Canada again. I don't expect to see Mike Johnston on the bench again. I don't expect to see Peter Anholt as the general manager of this team. Chris Lazary, I'm going to sound very ageist here, but here I go. As an older guy, I'm allowed to be ageist, Stephen. You essentially had three of the key people here in Dave Cameron, Peter Anholt, and Mike Johnston. These are all gentlemen in their late 60s. And if anything, and I think there probably is a recognition, just talking to some people this morning around Hockey Canada, I think there is a recognition that they need to, when it comes to their decision making, bring in more people under the tent who are younger, who have younger, fresher, newer ideas, because clearly the old way either to construct or deploy a team at this level. Quick pause. The women's program is still number one. Para is still number one as well. This is the one pocket here where there is a significant issue for Hockey Canada. It is in definite need of an injection of new ideas. And one of the things I kept thinking about, Stephen, this entire term and watching Team Canada is what's going through Chris Lazary's mind. He's 41, 42 years old, very progressive coach, forward thinker, won the Memorial Cup with Saginaw last year, like a really, a successful and smart on the younger side of things kind of coach. Does this not sort of look to you like the end of that era? I don't want to say it's going to be completely the end of the old boys network, but the beginning of the tearing down of that wall?
You hope so. I've talked to guys who coach AAA level that could easily be OHL coaches that don't want to go up to the OHL because you can make, in a lot of cases, more money coaching AAA. So you're probably missing out on some pretty bright minds that know how to mold these young kids and know how to work on the development angle. And, you look at the Hunters and everything they built in London. Like, imagine if you'd try that again, and you'd probably go out there and you could put a C-level team from Canada, but you'll be competitive because that's just what the Hunters typically do. I think the style of hockey that you see work in the NHL, like you look at a lot of teams add grit and you want that sandpaper for the playoffs, the grind that is, the 2-3 months of playoff hockey. But in a short tournament, the Radko Gudises of the world are not going to be the ones shining. It's the guys who can go out there and be like the Connor Bedards or the Trevor Zegras. In a lot of cases, just pure skill is what wins at a level like this. And that's partly because we're moving to a game that has just built on skill. Like kids are watching Pavel Barber videos and How to Hockey and all these guys on TikTok and YouTube to learn how to become more skilled players. And the skill development paths that we're seeing at the lower levels is so much better than it's ever been. So it's not like a lack of talent is a problem for Canada. Like they won the last two U17s. They've won almost every Hlinka ever in the history of the tournament. They just won the U18s a few months ago. They had bronze the year before that. Like these guys have shown just they are capable of winning games, but it felt like there was a lot of old school thinking in this team and in the way that everything worked out. And again, you look at the results, it just did not work.
Quickly from the chat, David Hartford says, for Stephen Ellis, you mentioned creating a mock team for Canada 2026 juniors. Does this team have a star factor like Bedard a couple of years ago, or does it involve more OHL synergies, or both? From David Hartford.
There's a mix of all of that. So that's a great question. I think Gavin McKenna obviously is the star power there, but you should see Michael Misa there. I think we'll see Porter Martone back. Matthew Schaefer will be eligible to play. I don't think we'll see him back. But then you're looking at a lot of guys who've been on winning teams at the U17 and U18 level. And specifically at the U17s, that's a good sign that they've won the last 2 years, because they've had this tendency to separate and have 2 to 3 teams. The last couple of years, they've only sent 2 teams. And I think that's been able to just give them a better chance at winning. So you've got these guys that have won these international tournaments against a lot of these players we're seeing at the World Juniors. So I think you're going to have really good goaltending, probably some of the best goaltending depth Canada has ever had, where you're going to, the 2 guys from this year, Ivan Kovic and George, will be back. Evan Gardner, the Columbus Blue Jackets prospect, probably should have been there this year. And Joshua Ravensbergen might be a first-round pick in the NHL this year. So that's really good goalie depth. I think their defense is going to be hard to play against. We should see Landon DuPont on the team, the next kind of star, Cale Makar level of hype. Maybe I shouldn't say hype, because Cale Makar wasn't super hyped at his draft year, but like, this is a special prospect in Landon DuPont, a 2009 born player. He'll be there. And you're looking at a team that might have Liam Greentree, a guy who could get 60 goals this year, as your 13th best forward on the team. Like, that's a team that probably would beat this year's group. And if they don't win gold, especially as we do expect teams like the United States and Sweden to fall down a little bit, that will be a big problem.
Really quick, tomorrow there will be I'm guessing, for lack of a better term, State of the Union address from Hockey Canada just after noon Eastern at the Canadian Tire Centre. Jonathan Goldblum will be there, chair of the Hockey Canada board. President and CEO of Hockey Canada, Catherine Henderson, will be there. Scott Salmon, Senior VP of High Performance and Hockey Operations, and Dean McIntosh will be there as well. There's no really way to predict how this thing is going to go. I think we have an expectation of what the nature of the questions are going to be. But what do you expect tomorrow at this presser?
A lot of the questions I think that you've asked today, and like a lot of it is just kind of, for me, I don't think this is something where you break the whole team down. You start from scratch. Because again, you look at all these other levels, the U17, the U18, they're winning those tournaments and they're showing that they still have the best talent. I think the key thing here is they just can't overthink this tournament anymore. They got to stop looking at this and saying, oh, this lineup might work in the NHL. No, this is, you've got the most skill of any country. You've got the biggest player pool. There's no excuse to be leaving off guys that are 60, 70 goal OHL players because you want to bring someone who can throw some hits, because you're probably not going to play that guy a lot anyway. So give yourself the best opportunity to win. Don't overthink this. Just take the best 25 players possible. And it'll be interesting if we do see kind of a full revamp of everyone who's running that team. But like, people are thinking like hockey, like Canada hockey and the junior hockey is a big problem right now. I'm not convinced of that, because they keep winning at all these other levels.
Really quick, the favorite now, clearly the United States, or will the Swedes have something to say about that?
It's not clearly the United States. Sweden's going to put up a fight, but I'd be putting money on the Americans. A lot of returning players. Those returning players are looking good. And if Trey Augustine's hot, again, that's a tough team to bet against.
Look like a repeat for USA. Okay, Stephen, excellent work. What's next, by the way, at Daily Faceoff for you? What do you got cooking?
Well, I'll be watching a little bit of the U18 women's tournament, of course, seeing how that one goes out. But I'm going to be having my Canada 2026 roster breakdown comes out tomorrow. And on Monday, I'm going to have scouting reports on every NHL prospect from the World Juniors.
Wow. Get some sleep in there, son. We worry about you. We were. Find a pillow. Find a pillow every now and then, will you, Stephen Ellis? All right, there he is from Daily Faceoff. No one knows the prospects better than Stephen Ellis. Thanks to Stephen, as always, for joining. And we did get a text from Decoy. Is that guy at an IKEA? No, I stayed in the same hotel last week as well. It's right downtown, but there were no dresser drawers anywhere to find. It was like exploding suitcase time. You walk in, you have nowhere to put your clothes. So it's like, okay, so the socks are going to go over here and the pants are going to go over here. It's like little clothing landmines all over the hotel. But and one fire alarm pulled, and then another emergency a couple of days before that. So it was an interesting time in Ottawa. The fire alarm pulled for Hockey Canada. In the meantime, it is Fridays, and that means our time with Brian Burke is now here. Burkie, how are you today, my good friend? You are on the sheet with your favorite broadcaster, yours truly.
How you doing, bud?
I'm doing well. It is the story of the day. It's been the story of the week, and I want to get to some NHL issues, and I do want to talk about Vancouver with you. But your thoughts on Canada and another quarterfinal exit at the World Juniors. At the women's level, Canada is still number one. At the para level, it is still number one. As Stephen Ellis just mentioned, it's U17 still successful. Hlinka Gretzky still very successful. It seems though there is this pocket here at the World Juniors, the U20s, where Canada seems to be having a hard time. What did you make of Canada's performance?
Well, that made me a little more optimistic than some of the people that watched that tournament, but they were 3 minutes away from winning that game last night, in my view. Mm-hmm. I thought they were outplaying the Czechs very badly in the third period. They looked like themselves. They looked like they were free of constraint and free to play, and they looked happy and they looked intense. They looked good. And then they took a dumb penalty, and people are going to argue about whether that was a good penalty or not. In my view, based on the standard of officiating in this tournament, I don't think it should be a penalty, but it was. And that's what derailed this thing. Otherwise, you'd be talking about, in my view, Canada beating the Czechs in overtime.
It is interesting. One of the people that I was talking to, and there was listen, there were a lot of moments where Canada stepped over the line, and you have to know, this, Burke, the standard for officiating in the IIHF is a lot different than it is in North America. We all know that. That gets baked into the pie. Coaches will tell their teams, this is not like playing in the OHL. This is not like playing Division I. This isn't like playing in the Western League. This is the standard for penalties is a lot different internationally than it is in North America. But the one thing that Canada used to always have, and I've been using Steve Downey in 2006 as the example, when Brent Sutter put Steve Downey on the team and was able to get to him, and he still was aggressive in the tournament. That's when the tournament was in Vancouver, was still aggressive in the tournament, but never stepped over the line. It was whistle to whistle. You remember how the Americans went at Downey. It was a rabbit punch here, back of the head, cross check, all trying to get Downey to do something dumb, and he never took the bait. It seemed at this tournament, though, and this, we also had Dave Cameron freaking out about penalties, it seems as if at every single turn, Canada led with their emotions in a negative way. Is that a fair criticism?
Yes, but I think it's a problem for both North American teams. I think Canada and the U.S. are both guilty of that in almost every tournament they play. There are stupid penalties taken by both North American teams. It drove me nuts with Team USA. It still drives me nuts with both these teams. But the penalty standards, whatever they are not being met in North America, in my view. They have to adjust. You don't say, okay, referees, you have to adjust your standard of officiating to us, how we play. What right. You say is we have to adjust to them. It's like we tell our players all the time, we don't have to make you fit in here. You have to fit in here. So to me, the notion that, somehow it should have been called, that last call was a penalty. The way the referee is being applied, that's a penalty.
And that one specific call was established in the first period. And if anything, I was kind of expecting them to throw a nickel at it and say that's a 5.
If anything, I was listening to the broadcast on TSN. Mike Johnson's analysis, and he's Canadian, by the way. Yeah. I know there are people rubbing their forehead saying, oh, here goes Brian Burke again. But the fact of the matter is Mike Johnson said the second call, if anything, is closer to a nickel than the first call, which was mistakenly assessed a nickel. I think that's the right standard. He got it away. It should have been a 2, and it wasn't. This should have been a 5, and it wasn't, but it had to be a 2. Had to be a 2 all day long.
Let me, now that we're on the topic of penalties, one of the things that when we work television together, that we turned this into a feature. It was Burke's first call, something like that. One of the things that you've always gone out of your way to talk about, and it's really changed the way that I've watched officiating, was how the first call of the game is the most important call of the game. I watch for this every game, whether I'm watching my kids, whether I'm watching the NHL, whether I'm watching the World Juniors. For our listeners / viewers, can you go into the idea of the first call being the most important call?
Well, it wasn't my view. I'd love to take credit for that concept, but that concept started with Brian Lewis. When I worked for Gary Bettman at the NHL from 93 to 98, I would go to training camp with the officials, and Brian Lewis is the one who taught them. The first call is the most important call. Because if you blow that call's got to be the right call, because if you blow that call, Now you're swimming. If they score on that power play, you've unjustly enriched one team. Now you got to even the score somehow. No one tells the referees to do that. It's human nature. They figure they owe these guys a goal. So the first call is critical, or you get into the soup. I used to tell you when we did these games together, Jeff, look at that first call. It's a bad first call, and the New York Rangers scored in the power play. Now we're going to be swimming all night. Yep. And it's bad call after bad call trying to even it up. So I tell two things I used to tell the officials. One is don't watch for penalties, look for penalties. In other words, your job is don't, we got it backwards. Don't look for penalties. Watch for them. Call what happens. Call what's organic in the game. Don't look for calls. Say, I'm gonna find a penalty. Watch for penalties. That's number one. And number two is the first call's got to be right.
Or else you start chasing it, and we've seen that happen with officials before. You have a final thought on the remain? Actually, let me one more thought about the World Juniors from you, Burke. Team USA is looking to repeat. We know that in Canada we make a lot about this tournament, rightly or wrongly. We've seen some young men have their careers catapulted. We've also seen a lot of players that have been really damaged by poor performances. And I think of a player like Maxime Comtois or the netminder Mark Vizentine going back to 2010 when he fell apart against the Russians in Buffalo. From an American point of view, and next year this tournament goes to Minnesota, how do the majority of Americans view this tournament? We tend to look at it and say, this is an audit of where hockey is in Canada, when really it's a developmental tournament for U20s. How do Americans generally, wide brush, how do Americans feel about this tournament?
Well, American hockey fans feel the same way Canadians do. They appreciate the importance of this tournament. They understand its relevance. They understand what a big stage it is. They understand what a huge step it is for these players. They get it just the same. They don't have a national day of mourning when they lose, but they get it, the same thing. They get it. So to me, a hockey fan in the U.S. is just as sophisticated as a hockey fan in Canada. There just aren't as many of them, perhaps. But the emphasis is still the same.
Okay, on the NHL page, and we'll see what happens now. We're all, I think, expecting a USA-Sweden final. And speaking of USA and Sweden, there's one American player on Vancouver and one Swedish player on Vancouver who can't seem to get along. And it's gone from whispers behind the scenes to coaches talking about it, to former coaches talking about it, to general managers giving interviews about it, to former teammates commenting on it as well, despite denials from both the participants, JT Miller and Elias Pettersson. Now, very specific to this is the Vancouver market, which you know, Burke, very well. If you were running the Vancouver Canucks right now, and again, you know the city, you know the people, you know the organization, the meaning behind the logo and all of it, how would you handle this situation? Let's begin there, because I'm guessing you've had situations like this before on some of your teams.
Yeah, I have. Everyone has. You can't play. I played for a championship team in Maine. We didn't all get along. Talk about playing PlayStation. We didn't even eat dinner together, some of us. We didn't all get along. We won a Calder Cup together. You don't have to get along. You just got to respect each other as players. So to me, the shocking part of this is not that there's discord or friction. The shocking part of this is that it's this public. This is wrong. This is not stuff that's supposed to be aired publicly. This has gone too far. The people involved, the coaches tried to calm this down. The GMs tried to calm this down. Jimmy Rutherford's tried to calm this down. It's still out there. It's gone too far. I blame the players involved for letting it get this far. But this is not anything unusual. This is routine for hockey clubs. What is not routine is how the broadcasting of it has been.
One of the things that's been interesting, because, listen, I've heard these whispers, as I'm sure you have, going back a couple of years. And, I think, and Bruce Boudreau weighed in on it not too long ago and said, when he was there was a belief that it had died down. But the one thing that I wonder about here is, because Rick Tocchet has talked about it recently. Patrick Allvin has talked about it recently. There was the moment where Rick Tocchet, separated them and, separated them on the power play as if to prove the point that this looks ridiculous. Like, do you think that there's a part of all of this where management and the coach have gotten together and said, like, look, this isn't getting any better. Maybe if we publicly shame them, because Rick Tocchet is saying, hey, why don't you get these guys out? Why don't you request the players and ask them about it? Don't ask me about it. Like, is there an element of the organization saying this isn't getting any better? Maybe if we just air it all out, it'll shame them into fixing this issue.
Yes, I think that's clearly you're talking about very impatient people. Jimmy Rutherford's an impatient guy. That's why he's successful. He would have called them in and said, you got to fix this, solve it. He would have called both players in. I would have called the players in separately and say, I'm not trading anyone. You two sort this out. I would have had them in separately. And when I brought them in together and say, you want to grab a case of beer somewhere and go drink beer and solve it? Do it that way. You want to fight? You want to go out after practice and fight? Solve it that way. Let's solve it. Fix it. I'm sick of hearing about it. And then Patrick Allvin would have done the same thing. Jimmy would have done the same thing. It's not working. So now the best thing is to let it shame them into making it work, and see if you can move on. The good thing is teams have distractions too. A fight will happen where players rally around the team. Something will happen that'll get the team to rally around them and forget about this. But right now, it's a major problem.
You know, one of the things that I find really interesting about this too is like I'm with you, like not to sound like I'm some kind of, shaved ape, although I got a picture of a monkey behind me. But once upon a time, just two guys would roll up their sleeves and settle it, and then it would be done. It would be over, and it would be done with, and everybody would just move along. But like, there's a sort of generation gap in between these two as well. Very, very different personalities. Like, I can understand, and I actually like when veteran players get on younger players and push them to be better in things like in practice and in finishing checks and all types of things that involve the game. But it seems in this case, you listen to Brad Richardson talking about, JT running Elias Pettersson real hot when Brad Richardson was on the Vancouver Canucks. It seems as if this was more than just, expectations of the player on the ice, which leads me to believe if they can't get this thing settled, do they have to trade one or the other? Like, is it incumbent?
That's a last resort. At some point, it will come to that. You're talking big contracts on guys who, because of the tension, are underperforming. You're not going to get full value right now. I would let Elias Pettersson's not going to fight JT Miller.
No.
Someone else will have to do it. Someone else will have to grab JT after practice and say, I'm sick of this garbage. Let's sort it out now. You're too big for this guy. You're too good a fighter, but I'm not. I'm good, and I can take you on. Let's see if we can sort it out. That might be what it needs to be, some trial by combat thing that sorts us out. That might be what happens. You're right. When I played, we would fight to solve this. And it's not a good method of resolving disputes, I know. And I know a lot of people are scratching their heads saying, did he just say they should fight? Yes. I fought Kevin Gaffney. I remember my first training camp in Providence. Yeah. I fought a guy who was a junior, much bigger than I was, tough as nails. Had a great fight. We were friends ever since. First time I met Paul Holmgren, I fought him. Been friends ever since. Oh, yeah. So sometimes it's exactly what you need to do.
How does the Vancouver market, I'm going to get off this topic, but I do want to ask you about Vancouver since you know it so well. How does the Vancouver market factor into this? I mean, in some ways, it's not unlike any other Canadian market. Anything hockey plus conflict equals explosion. But is there something specific to Vancouver that just can't, like, it seems like every day there's just log after log getting thrown on this fire. Is there something there, Burke?
Yes. It's a unique market. It's a great market. I loved working there. I worked there twice. Both times our teams got better. Both times our crowds came back. I loved working in Vancouver. I really missed when I left. I loved it. I loved every minute of it. But we didn't have the social media then so much. That's a new development, certainly since I worked for Pat Quinn, and certainly the second term was just coming on. But social media has made this a market where they tear each other apart. Everything is second-guessed. Everything is criticized. It's wild to watch, and it's unique. They will tear you apart there, no question about it. But I think Rick Tocchet has done a good job of saying to the players, ignore the white noise. Like the social media, you don't learn anything there. You're not going to learn anything about our team or what makes things better. Just a bunch of nuts. So just put it to the side. think he's done a good job doing that. The mainstream media in Vancouver, excellent.
You know, one of the interesting things here is this is in a lot of ways a sidebar to the real issue in Vancouver with this team. Now, again, they almost squandered one last night and let Seattle beat them. We'll see what happens with the Thatcher Demko injury. But as everyone talks about Elias Pettersson and JT Miller, it does seem to me that what's getting ignored here is the big problem with Vancouver right now, or the big issue with Vancouver is a better way to frame it. And that's the injury to Quinn Hughes. Like, they are night and day a different team with him in the lineup or out of the lineup. And in some ways, Burke, it kind of reinforces his Hart Trophy candidacy. Like, you can see it. Like, Vancouver is a completely different team when Quinn Hughes is not in the lineup. When he's in the lineup, things are great. It's awesome. A lot of the mistakes get erased. But when he's out, you can really see it. This team is profoundly different. That is, outside of the soap opera of JT and Elias here, that is the big story, or should be the big story in Vancouver, no?
Well, I agree. And what's amazing is watch the impact his absence has, even when he doesn't have the puck. Like, his impact as a player is profound. His impact when he's not on the ice seems to be equally profound. The players seem to be looking for him for direction and guidance at all times, which is really unique for a defenseman. Very few defensemen have that impact. So I think he's a wonderful player. He's a great kid. But yeah, that absence, Thatcher Demko getting hurt, Quinn Hughes getting hurt, and this friction. You're talking about a formula that could flush the season right down the sewer. Mm-hmm. But I don't think that'll happen with Rick Tocchet and Patrick Allbeat in charge.
One of the things that's come out of this, interestingly enough, one of the things that's come out of this situation with JT Miller and Elias Pettersson is other players are starting to comment about friction that they saw on their teams. Like, I've talked plenty. Brian, you and I have talked about it on the old Hey Berkey series about, Bob Gainey and Serge Savard and the animosity there, and that bled into when they were managers, etc. Like, again, no stranger to the hockey world. But I want to play a clip from you. This is one of your former players. This is Jay Rosehill, who hosts a show with Nick Alberga here, Leafs Morning Take, and he was talking about a similar situation that he saw and had, not personally, but other players, with the Toronto Maple Leafs. Here's Jay Rosehill from a couple of days ago.
It reminds me of Dion Phaneuf. When he got to Toronto, he'd be hard on guys, and he'd chirp, and he'd always talking, and he'd get under guys' skin. And sometimes he'd pick a guy that didn't like that and would shy away from it, and he'd smell blood, and he'd go after that guy all the time. And, not to the point where guys are in tears, but like damn close. Like you can go too far. You can push too far, and instead of motivating and challenging, you get to be putting down. And I'm not saying Dion was doing that, but some guys just don't respond to that. And more than ever nowadays, these younger players don't respond to it. I remember when I was, leaving North American hockey, going, these 20-year-olds, if you say one thing about them that might be like, a little bit of a challenge or a little bit of a, do you agree with that? Does that motivate you? And they're just like, duh. How dare, like no one's ever said that to me. My mom's always said I'm incredible. My agent says I'm incredible. My dad says I'm incredible. My coach says I'm incredible. Like, what do you, and you just shut down, flabbergasted, just very mentally weak. And I'm not saying that's with Elias Pettersson necessarily, but there's definitely an element to an old school guy like Miller and maybe a new school kid like Pettersson, and is not jiving well, which is obviously unfortunate for the Canucks.
You made Dion Phaneuf captain of the Toronto Maple Leafs. I know you loved him as a player, loved him as a person as well. Not the first player to challenge younger players, but do you have a thought, or does anything resonate there from Jay Rosehill's comments?
Well, I had Rosie too. He played for me. I love Rosie. I go on his show all the time, but I think the criticism of Dion's going too far. I'm not going to let that take place while I'm watching this show. He was tough on players, but we weren't very good. And we needed that guy to make us better, and he did make us better. I love Dion. He's a great guy, and he was a great leader on our team. I think Rosie's taken a little too far, but his point's the right one. Dion challenged players. He said, we're not good enough. I'm going to challenge everyone to play better, challenge himself to play better. And that gets on people's nerves sometimes. I welcomed it. That's why I brought him in there. We had a loud voice. We liked him to have a loud voice. I can find people who are meek. I can find people who don't say anything. I can find people who are followers. I wanted leaders in that room, and that's what Dion was. But Rosie, he was a good guy on our team too. I don't want to start that fight.
What do people? Because one of the things that I always respected about Dion Phaneuf is, and you would always make this point about Jeffy. You'd be surprised how many Canadian players have all Canadian markets on their no trade. One of the things that always impressed me about Dion Phaneuf is not everybody wants the stage in Canada. It takes a certain type of person to embrace what comes along with being on a stage in the Canadian market. And here's Dion Phaneuf, who embraced it in Calgary, who embraced it in Toronto, embraced it in Ottawa as well. Like, what is everybody? What did everybody miss about Dion Phaneuf in Canada?
Well, the average Canadian player is worried about his tax bill, so he's taking home $5 million instead of $5.5 million. He's worried about his tax bill, not how he's treated. I used to tell our player, I told Matt Stajan this once in Calgary. I said, you guys will look back on your careers when you retire, and the best times you'll remember are when you were in Canada. You'll remember you were loved, you were respected, you were revered. You won't feel that anywhere you play anywhere else. So that's just to tell the players. Dion loved that. He loved being in Canada. I'll tell you a story about Dion.
Sure.
We went in after a game, and I had these two people that bought lunch with or dinner with me for Special Olympics, I think it was, and I brought them in a dressing room tour after the game. So after the game, Dion's doing his weights. He comes out. There's two complete strangers there in suits. They're walking by, and I said, Dion, I'd like you to meet Mr. Jones and Mr. Smith from Special O. Hey, nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. He turns to me and barks, we need to get bigger, goddammit. Right in front of these two guys. So these two guys said to me, your GM talks to you like that? And I said, yeah, Dion does. Well, that's Dion. That's Dion. He's got no filter, but all big heart, all the right reasons for everything.
Do you remember? I always believed that it was, I can't remember who it was that he fought, but there was a game against the New Jersey Devils, and I can't remember, he had a goal and he fought someone. I was always under the belief that was the moment that, in your mind, he was going to be the captain of the Toronto Maple Leafs. Do you remember if that was accurate? And if not, was there a game or a moment where you said, we got to put the C on that guy?
Well, Ronnie Wilson, I talked about as soon as we made the trade, and that was an obvious candidate for us. We both felt that. But yeah, there was, I forget who it was he fought, but he fought someone tough and beat him. Mm-hmm. Had a goal, had about 6 big hits. And so, yeah, it was someone at my door. Sorry. That no was the turning point. But yeah, that's a true story.
Okay. Meech VB in our chat is asking for Phil Kessel stories. Everybody loves Phil Kessel stories. I still maintain that everybody loves Phil Kessel, one of the most lovable players in maybe the history of the NHL. Do you have a favorite Phil Kessel story, Burke?
Well, I remember one time he was getting hammered in the media, just getting fried. And Phil's a very polarizing guy because Phil doesn't care what you think. He doesn't care what the media think. He doesn't care what I think. He only cares what his teammates think. And that maddens people. It's aggravating that people in the media who's right. When I hammer Phil Kessel, he should be apologetic. He should care. And Phil's like, I don't care. So one time he was getting a beating in the media, and I called him in. I went and sat down in the stall with him in the dressing room. And I said, Phil, you're getting a beating here. You want me to brush the flies off and bark at him for a couple of days? He said, Burke, look around this room. The only people in this room are the people I care about. I don't care about anyone else. So that's what it drove people nuts. They thought he should care. He should care more that I don't like him as a player. It should bother him, and it didn't bother him, and that drove the media even more nuts. So I loved having him as a player. I'd have him back again tomorrow.
You know, one of the things that, I always maintain that when you're a team that has to grind for every single goal, games are tough. And the luxury about, I always looked at Phil as like this incredible luxury item that he could come down the wing, snap in 2 goals. And you know what it's like when you have someone that can score easy goals. The pressure's gone. Like, we don't have to grind to get back in this game. We don't have to grind to get this goal. Like, do you have a thought, Burke, on Phil Kessel and his ability to just get a team back in the game easy because he always had that shot that could bring a team right back into the game. Like, what a luxury for any team to have.
Oh, people forget that Phil is one of the strongest guys on the team. So when you lift weights with a team, and you look at, I started this with training camp with the New Orleans Saints. And so you go in the offensive linemen have one set of weights set up, and they do all the heavy lifting. The offensive linemen lift together, then the linebackers lift together at the next set of weights. So they don't have to change the weights all the time. Mm-hmm. The only two guys who can lift the heaviest set of weights for us with the Leafs, Dion Phaneuf and Phil Kessel. People are shocked at that. This guy was a physical specimen. Now, his conditioning wasn't great all year. I would slip a little bit as the year went on. But he would start the season in great VO2 max, throw the weights around like a madman. People realize the preparation that he did to get ready for the season. And everyone says, oh, Phil Kessel, he's lazy. He wasn't lazy at all. I would have him back in a heartbeat. Part of 3 cups, 2 that really counted. Really good player, really good guy, really good Leaf, really popular Leaf.
Mm-hmm. Okay, a couple more things I want to ask you about here. I don't want to get on the Ovechkin page in a couple of seconds because you've seen his entire career. Zach L'Heureux of the Nashville Predators just got suspended for 3 games for a slew foot on Jared Spurgeon of the Minnesota Wild. When I think about all the penalties in the NHL, or all the things you could get suspended for me, slew footing is right up around the top. Like, that is the one that I look at and I say, I have nothing but contempt for players that slew foot other players. Like, I have zero understanding. I will not even have the conversation about, well, he didn't mean it. Like, to me, slew footing is the ultimate dirty, vicious play in the NHL. I know some will say, oh, cross-check to the face and all this. To me, slew footing is just ugly. No one's expecting to get their feet taken out from under them. We all know how fast the guys can skate. We all know how the boards don't move. And this was all in concert. Spurgeon's going in to chase a puck that's deep in his zone. I hate slew footing. I'm disgusted by it. Do you have a thought on that particular infraction?
Yeah, believe it or not, I'm with you. I don't agree with you all the time, Jeff. But on that one, I think it's one of the most dangerous ones. When you cross-check a guy in the face, at least he's got some chance to see it coming and deflect it. Right. A slew foot, player's unprepared. He's battling for the puck. He's off balance. He's not ready for the hit, and he gets thrown backwards. I agree with you. I think the league made the right call. I love the North Star or the Wild's response. Love Jakob Trennan's response. Yeah. He jumped in there immediately, and that's what I love about our game, that there is still self-help, self-policing, and self-help. So that to me was, he deserved the suspension. I don't like slew footing. I don't see any, for one thing, there's no positive purpose to it. Most fouls, if you take a roughing foul, you're trying to body check somebody. You might cross the line, but you're trying to do something useful. Slew foot, just a dirty play.
You know, that leads me to wonder about another thing with you, Burke. At the beginning of the season, would you ever talk to your team about things like slew footing, or here's the other hot button one, diving? Would you ever talk to your team or coaching staff about these infractions?
Yes.
What would you say?
I would say I don't encourage either one of them. I don't like either one of them. I tell our players, we don't dive. We don't respect diving. We don't want to see it. And if a player did dive, I would call him, and even if he get fined for it, and say, we don't do that here. We don't do that here in Toronto. We don't do that here in Vancouver. We don't slew foot people. We don't spear people. We want to play the right way. We want to play hard. We want to play the right way.
When you wore the sheriff's badge in the NHL and you had the role we now know as, the head of the Department of Player Safety, what was the easiest suspension for you? What was like the one that you looked at and you're like, okay, this one's simple. This is open and shut.
Well, there were a few of them were open and shut, but there was the one, I'm trying to think, St. Louis. We cross-checked, drawing a blank on his name. One of them was the Pavel Bure one that I let go. That was one Shane Churla.
Yeah.
Get away with that one, and that was one that people talk to most about the one I blew the worst. But I'd say Shane Churla, he called me about a Chris Chelios called me about a suspension that had occurred in a game with no one sent in. And Chris Chelios said to me, I just got 5 games for the same thing Shane Churla just did in that game. So I watched the game, it was right. I gave the same suspension. That was easy to me. It happened about 2 weeks before. It wasn't that well known, but it got widely publicized after I suspended him. But took one look at it and I said, Chris Chelios, you're right. What Shane Churla just did is exact mirror image of what happened to you. He got 4 games for it. That's what he's going to get too.
We've got a couple of minutes left here. I want to ask you about Alexander Ovechkin. Chasing the record, obviously, for the Wayne Gretzky goals record. He's 23 away after scoring last night against the Minnesota Wild. You know, he telling Marc-Andre Fleury he needs another one, and Fleury says, no, you already got one. Nice little moment between two guys that went up against each other in those Washington Pittsburgh Penguins games. But you were there from day one. 2005, his first season, he scores 52 goals, and it's not as if he has a murderer's row around him. It's Dinas Zubris, and it's Chris Clark and Brooks Laich and Jeff Halpern and these types of names around the Washington Capitals. When you go back and look at Ovechkin in his first season, now take us back to 2005. I think we're all blown away by the power, the shots, his physicality, the way that he didn't give up on pucks going to the net. We all remember that Coyotes goal. When you look back now, like, what did you think of Ovechkin at the time? And was there any thought that he was going to be, because no one thought he was going to catch Gretzky, like, get that out of the way. But was there any thought that we're watching someone who's going to be the best goal scorer of this generation? Is that fair?
No, I thought he was a bull of a player. I liked him right away. I liked his physicality. What I like about Alex Ovechkin is he celebrates goals by his teammates as much as his own. He gets as excited when Tom Wilson scores, he gets as excited as when he does. I love that. I love that enthusiasm for his teammates. But I love the fact that he's played hard. I never thought he'd break Gretzky's record. Anyone who tells you they did is lying. He's 40. He's going to be 40 this year. He's going to be 40 years old. He's still chasing the record. And he's having a great year again. So, no, I think he's been great for our game. I think he's knocked down one barrier. A lot of people didn't like Russian players. Now they like him. I think he popularized Russian players after they won the cup with all of his antics in the pool. He's just a great guy.
It's always interesting the way that, you'll never win with this guy until you do. And, you know, I've always maintained about Ovechkin, Burke, I don't think I've ever talked to you about this one, that what he was able to do for that Washington Capitals organization, you know, not just the team and the wins and losses, but how that building, it was sellout after sellout after sellout after sellout. You know, we talk about the salary cap and the max you can get is 20%. When you look at what Ovechkin did to that team, what Ovechkin did, you know, by way of selling tickets and jerseys and invigorating the Washington Capitals brand, to say nothing of what he's done for the National Hockey League and this Wayne Gretzky chase. If you could ever make a case for someone who should be exempt from the salary cap and just pay him whatever he wants, I'll also put Crosby in that conversation too. Ovechkin would be one of those players. Where are you at on the effect that Ovechkin had in Washington and around the NHL?
Well, I think you're talking about players that are generational players, which I hate that term's overused, but even more than generational players, not just the best players of their generation, but revolutionized the sport and saved the franchise. And that would be Sidney Crosby, Alex Ovechkin. Those are players that went in and single-handedly rescued the franchise. Yeah. So I look at what Alex Ovechkin has done. I've told the story before. I didn't see Alex at the Olympics in 2010 after my son had passed away. Yeah. Went to the World Championships that year, even though they were eliminated, and played in the Olympics. It was an Olympic year. He still went and played for Russia in the Worlds in Cologne. And I walked by the dressing room, and Alex was in there. And I said, "Hey, Alex," I walked by and he yelled, "Burke, Burke." I went and sat down next to him, and he put his arm around me and said, "I didn't see you in Vancouver. I'm so sorry about your son." Now, this is not a guy that I knew. This is not a guy that played for me somewhere. A guy I just met that I respected. We've been friends ever since. So This guy's been great for our game. I love the fact that he's going to break this record. I hope it's this year. I'm not convinced it's going to be, though. I think they're on a great roll now in Washington, and teams are waking up to that now.
You know, if it's not this year, then they'll have an entire summer to plan for it and really get the celebrations started. If they can have an entire summer's worth of marketing heading into next season, we'll see where that one heads. Listen, Brian, thanks as always. Have a wonderful weekend.
Jeff. Let me interrupt you 1 sec.
Sure.
Obi and Teemu Selanne and Obi remind me very much of their same careers.
Okay.
13 or 15 years, some great individual success, no team success, then finally won their cup. And I feel those two players are very much alike in terms of the impact they had and finally got rewarded at the end.
Love to hear it. You're great, Brian. As always, thanks so much for stopping by Fridays here on the sheet. Really appreciate it. Best of the new year to you and your family. Health and happiness to the Burks, and we'll catch up with you in 7 days, my friend.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks.
There he is, Brian Burke, who joins the sheet every Friday, whether it's current events or whether it's questions from the chat. Speaking of the chat, Colby Cohen accusing us of... No, he is soft tampering with the sheet chat, trying to get people over that. No, the way it works is I try to steal everybody from the Morning Cup of Hockey chat and migrate them over to this little property here, Zach. It's not supposed to be the other way around. And he took exception to me saying, oh, nobody's like Chris Clark, his old teammate. Didn't have a problem with me roasting Matt Pettinger, though. Have a problem with me roasting Dana Zubris, though.
Well, Colby said nice things about me, so I'm all on Colby's side today. Anything Colby says, he's got to pass. Yeah.
The thinnest veil in hockey media is worn by you. The way if you think that you can bribe your way into something with Zach Phillips, you're 100% right.
Yes, correct.
All right, got to hustle because I actually have a meeting here coming up in a couple of moments. You have a final thought on either the show or the week? Burke was great, eh? Some more great stories from Brian?
Yeah, Burke's always great. Yes, Burke is always great. Glad to have Steven on to kind of recap the week that was with Hockey Canada.
That is going to be. I can't wait for that presser tomorrow. My kid's on the ice. I'm going to be watching it on my phone. I cannot wait for that press conference tomorrow. The State of the Union address from Hockey Canada. I think they had.
I'll ask you this, Jeff.
Yeah.
On it, they're going to do the State of the Union, and I know you got to get out of here quick, so that's fine. But are they going to say anything useful? Seriously, what are they going to say that's not going to get nitpicked and torn apart by media and fans?
It's a great question, and you know what? I hate saying this as a member of the media, but right now they shouldn't really say anything. I think they should express disappointment. I think they should say, at the end of this tournament, we're going to roll up our sleeves and have a good hard look at what happened here. We want to thank everybody for their hard work leading into this tournament. This wasn't the results we wanted. This wasn't the result that we expected. But we are determined to blah, 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 and all the things that you would expect. I don't think it'll end there. I think that they'll continue to be grilled about it as the press conference goes on. But if I was to me, you play in a situation like that, you can play two things. You can play sword or you can play shield. And I think in the situation tomorrow at this press conference, I think Hockey Canada is going to play shield more than anything else. I think the last thing they should do is play sword. They should play shield. Sword will come later, but I think tomorrow is going to be all about playing shield. That's my take on it. Mike in the chat, by the way, Jeff, do you have a top 5 hockey books? Yeah, you know what? I'd love to do a segment on it as well. Zach, write that down. Let's do a top 5 hockey. I mean, I got books behind me. Might as well talk about them. On one of the sort of quieter days, we'll do more book talk because, listen, people do love reading hockey books, and I do love talking about them. And my favorite is They Call Me Gump still, which I still maintain. They Call Me Gump is, how would I describe this? They Call Me Gump is like Twitter before Twitter. And Gump Worsley, in some ways, was Paul Bissonnette before there was Paul Bissonnette. As far as being outspoken about everything. Let me frame it that way. Let me give you that sort of as a little bit of a tease. Anyhow, to everybody in the chat, thank you. As always, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel here on Daily Faceoff. Make sure to like. Make sure to rate and review. Am I doing this right, Zach Phillips?
Yes, correct. I was going to do it for you, so you didn't have to. But
okay, very good. An old dog, you can teach him some new tricks and different lines to say. Listen, thanks to everybody here. Thanks to you for watching. Thanks to you for listening. Thanks to you for being in the chat. It's really appreciated. 2025 is going to be a great one here for the sheet. Zach and I have a number of things that are cooked up for you and can't wait to get into. Now that we've flipped the calendar and we're getting comfortable around this place, it's probably time to start, if not breaking, at least denting some of the stuff around here. And we hope you can be with us as we do it. Have a wonderful weekend. We wish for you and your family health and happiness, as I just said to Brian and his family, health and happiness to you and yours. For those of you that have lost loved ones, I know what that feels like. I think we all do. Heading into 2025 in a different scenario can be daunting. I hope that this program can at least bring an hour's worth of lighthearted hockey conversation and sunshine and smiles to your life, as you've given me plenty of that in my life. Thank you so much for joining me here on The Sheet. We are back Monday, 3 o'clock Eastern, noon Pacific. We'll talk to you then. Have a great weekend. Enjoy the juniors. Canadian hockey fans, it's okay. The sun keeps coming up. We're going to be all right. We'll talk to you on Monday. Don't forget Morning Cup of Hockey. There's one for you, Colby. Morning Cup of Hockey kicks off our broadcast day, 9 o'clock Eastern on our Daily Faceoff YouTube channel. That's right here. We'll talk to you next week.